All right, we're back with more Triple Triad. This time again, talking about meeting a corner starter with an adjacent corner. And this time I'm going to really focus on identifying the main line, because I think a huge strength some players had over others is instead of spending lots of time calculating extraneous or secondary moves, a good player will quickly identify here is the key line and evaluate that first and then move on to lesser lines. And that doesn't mean the main line is necessarily the best line in all situations. It means it's the critical line to check first given the position or structure or move type. So here we're going to start off with a position where in the previous time when I was talking about capturing corner starters, this was one where there is no capture. And so this is already going to be a tough starter to meet. It's always difficult to meet starters when you can't capture any of their sides. And I think most players look to 5, because 5 is the only square that affects both 2 and 6, and thus is the only way that gives you a chance to set up against both sides of the starter. And here there's no double setup move in 5, and so players will start moving more distant. We can't take it, we can't set up against it, let's try to figure out and do my own thing. And some players will be incentivized, or will like to do far opposite corners here, which would be going in 7. Others look to adjacent corners, 3 or 9. Some are happy to do either, depending on wherever they have a strong defended corner. Others will say this is a confusing position, and Nimloth wrote an early article on strategy and said, when confused, I tend to play in 6 or 8 here. And I think that's a pretty reasonable idea too. But here, a natural looking move, I think, is 9-5-3A and 9. I hope you agree. It gives us, we have a Pete plus wall in 8, so it is one we can take back comfortably. It gives us a plus in 6, but it does not give blue a plus in 6. It seems to have like a reasonable amount going for it. The one real downside of the stuff we considered is we can't take their starter from the other side, from 2. But it sort of meets every other criteria. It gives us a plus in the in-between square. It's something we can secure by plus wall easily from 8 ourselves. And so you'd think there'd be a bunch going for it, and it looks like a pretty strong move. It's a strong corner. They can only take it from one side. We can take it from both. But it's not actually a very good move here, and I think that's a kind of complicated understanding, and I might not be able to explain it adequately, but I'm going to try. So one flaw, the obvious flaw, is we still don't have 2. But that's going to be true of any adjacent corner reply. Of course, if we had played in 1, we would not have 6 in those situations. We don't control their starter, we don't have good captures on it, and there is no move that's going to set us up to be able to capture both sides. So any move's going to have this flaw, and that doesn't identify why this would really be better or worse, except that perhaps adjacent corners really are a move type that needs you to control the other side. But the bigger problem, I think, is we don't have good L's and we're not great directionally. If you look at where our hand's strong, and especially compared to where their hand is strong, they have an A to the left and to the right, and they have a 9 to the left and up. And if we look at our hand, we have an A up, but they don't have that much down strength. Our 9 is often going to be good enough. We have an A to the left, but we don't have an A to the right. And our 9 to the right, in fact, can be stopped by their 9 or their A. So with the game directed right, our hand doesn't line up very well with theirs, which is a problem, because the game really is very likely here to be rightward power is going to be paramount. And the second problem is we don't have natural L setups, right? When they play in the in-between square, we want to play somewhere setting up an L, so either in 2 or 8. Here, 2's not going to be very likely because we can't take the card in 3, so it's usually going to be 8, where we want to be able to set up against their move in 6. And one of, I think, the really interesting differences between these adjacent corners and the type of move I talked about first, capturing their starters, is when we capture their starter, we can often tell how they're going to recapture, and we can plan it so that they do or don't, the opponent does or doesn't have a move in 5. And we play the next move. So we capture their starter, they recapture, and we get to play in one of the other corners, and that move can further set up pluses or sames against any potential threat in 5. So capturing a starter is very forcing and obviously has some problems. We give up a secure card immediately. But it does give you moves where controlling 5 is important, and it is easy to check whether you do control 5. With an adjacent corner, that can be a lot harder to do. As we can see here, blue has multiple cards they can put in 6, without facing values that are hard for us to take. Both an A and a 9 are quite tough for us to take. And we might also, depending on what they play in 6, have to retake our card in 9, which limits the cards we can take back with. So we actually don't have very much control of the L's we set up. And my main point here is going to be, when our L does not control the 5 square, it's often really dangerous and positions are going to be very hard to play. I do think while moves in the distance, moves in say 1, 4, or 7 are important, sometimes even moves in 5 are good, depending on situations, moves in 2 or 8, but in general the main line in these structures is just the in-between move, right? We've set up a big threat in 6, they do not have that same square for their cards, so they're very likely to block that square. And if our move is bad, that's often the correct point, both because they take away a square where we have a lot of strength, and because we don't have that good L to set up. And I really think that L is the most important thing. And I talked about directionality, but one of the reasons directionality is so important is because if we were really good going right, it would be a lot easier for us to set up an L where we have a double capture from 5 after cards are put in 6 or 8. So I think 6 is the main line. And blue's going to go in 6, and there are a bunch of different options, and we're going to go through the 3 plausible ones, I think. But the main line is going to be blue goes 6. And then where are we going to go after, right? Well, we're probably not going to have a move in 2. We'll get into some ideas there, but mainly our most likely play is, of course, 8. Because 2 cannot secure anything for us. And then their move is either we threaten something in 5, in which case they likely have to block 5 if they don't have some alternative way to control it. And if we don't play something in 5, or we don't threaten something in 5, they can play in 7, and that's going to be really dangerous for us if we don't have a good move in 5. So the main line in these structures to calculate is often going to be, they go 6, I go 8. Can they go 7? Or have I forced them to have to block 5? And if I force them to block 5, I'm often in good shape because I've secured that card in 9. They've only secured the card in 6, and I already have access to another securing move in either 2 or 7. Those situations are really good. But if they don't have to block 5, it's usually trouble, and I should check that line. And from when I'm making my very first move in 9 here, I should think, okay, they go 6, I go 8, they go 7. Do I have ties or wins there? Because those positions, as I said, are really scary. So, there are three cards I think that make sense for them to play in 6. This is the first one we're going to look at. It is the only card they can play that captures the card in 9 and isn't comboed back when we plus wall 9. Nor do we have a perfect L, so it makes a lot of sense for blue to play, right? We cannot play a card in 8, recapturing our card in 9, and set up a double capture in 5. Which means we don't have a move for 5, and they can go in 7 there. So we should know the main line. The main line is they play 6, we play 8, and they play 9. And they force us to try to have something in 5, and they're going to have lots of access to that square. They're going to have potentially good moves in 2, as well as 4, and sometimes even setups in 1. And this can just be very, very dangerous. And I just can't stress enough how dangerous these lines are when they're not forced to block 5. And one of the reasons these structures are a lot better in non-combo, because it is harder for them to control our plays in 5, and it is also more key to secure cards, and second turn will be first to secure a card. But once we get into combo and open, I came from closed no combo. I played a lot of that before I started playing open, and so I had this really good formational sense, because I think closed no combo is like pure formational skill. And I was very good at that, and the L in those rule sets is just a wonderful structure for second turn. But it is a much riskier structure, and we have to be a lot more precise about it in open combo. And I should say, and I'll say this again, their starter was really hard for us to meet. It's no surprise that moves aren't going to be that satisfying against, a starter or a hand just wasn't prepared to meet the random. But anyways, so what's the main line? It's us going in 8. We don't threaten anything in 5, so they can go in 7. What's the card they're going to put in 7? Well, it's definitely going to be 9A37. That's the card they kind of most want to get out of their hand. It is safe. We can't capture it. We'd be able to capture anything else. It captures our card in 8, which we can't recapture. And we're already in a really tough situation. This one happens to be salvageable. A7, 4, 7, and 5 happens to tie. It does give them the plus wall in 2, but we can respond with a plus of our own in 4. And we just barely scrape by on this one. But there's just, I think, the one tie. I didn't check for others because I very much do this kind of mainline thinking where I go, what's the main square, try to find stuff there, and if I can't, then check other squares. And I think that is a useful and practical skill. And the only reason that ties is because they're so weak facing right, which leads to the question, what if they didn't play 6, 8, 9, 5, and 6? What if they played a different card there and kept more right facing value? But already we should have this sense that, like, they could play a move that probably wasn't even the best move in 6 and give us the L that we had set up. And it was pretty hard for us. We barely snuck a tie. We have no real winning hopes here. They have just way too many safe cards that we can't pressure at all. And yeah, it just seems to me like if we calculated this line, if we said, okay, I want to go 9, and then they'll block 6, say with 6, 8, 9, 5, and I have to recapture, I won't have anything for 5 there, they can go 7, this looks really bad. And maybe you can calculate the whole game from playing that first move, and you find this tie, and you go, okay, I'm willing to accept this tie, but it seems a lot of work for not much of a result. So I would already be pretty down on 953A and 9 as a move, despite the fact that it achieves so many things that seem like they should be good. It controls 6, we can recapture it both ways, they can't recapture it both ways. And yet, because the resulting L's are bad, it's not a very good move. So okay, what about a different move in 6? Here, this makes a lot of sense to me. Blue keeps more rightward strength in their hand. We still have no L. We don't have a card that we can set up that gives us the double capture from 5. And again, this is possible to save. Like, we're not lost yet, but my question is, what would you play? Now, we don't have to play 9, 8, 8, 4, and 8 this time, right? We have choices, and the correct choice will bring us to a tie, but it's already this just overly difficult situation where, because we don't have a good L, even though we could make this safe card, they have safe cards too. You know, we can't capture 3, and we're just not getting much out of this. So what would you play? Feel free to pause and think about it. So the first move I looked at was 3, 6, 8A, and 8. It seemed to me this was giving up the card that had the least useful value remaining. It was a card that we can plus wall 2 different ways in 7, and they can't. And it's a card easy for us to take from 5, right? The lowest outfacing value will give us the most options in 5. But then I started looking at 9A, 3, 7, and 7. You know, again, we don't threaten 5, so they don't have to go in 5. They should go in 7 if we can't go 5. And we have no captures. We have this vulnerable 3 facing up from 8. Can you find a tie? And don't waste too long looking here because, again, I think it's just impractical to be reaching this kind of position. It just looks so unpleasant to me that, you know, I wouldn't spend too long on it. And in fact, there was no tie, which is part of the reason I told you not to spend too long on it. So my first instinct there was just a move that loses. Here is the tie. Again, we don't have a threat in 5, so they should by default be going in 7 unless there's something really spectacular elsewhere. And can you find a tie versus it? And I think the difference is that the 368A, I was a little wrong in my initial estimation of the position, is a more valuable card to keep around than the 6977. It has some spots where, you know, it captures something in 5 from 2 and has a outfacing A that they can't take. And it has a little more defensive power, right? Because cards like 6977 have a lot of power to plus wall and to combo, and cards with an A have just more defensive force. And if we just need to kind of hold things together, often the high numbers can work a little better. So try to find a tie. So the tie there was either 3, 6, 8A and 2, which is quite hard for them to take, or a 7, 4, 7 and 4 tied. You can go back and check. I'll go back right now, and then you can pause if you want to. Oops. Sorry, the thing isn't moving when I want it to between slides, but if you want to look at it for a sec, you can check that those moves tie here. All right. So I actually think the best move, the best L, is not in fact to go in 8. One reason that we might think to look in 2 rather than 8 is they can't take our card in 9, right? They didn't capture it, and they don't have a way to, and so we don't actually have to block there. And so we can look at other L's, like in 2, and it might seem weird to play in 2 blocking in their card, but we were never going to take it anyway. I hope we've looked at enough lines that it's pretty clear our hand is just never setting anything up against it. And this is a much harder card for them to deal with. We have the plus wall in 1, so if they take from 5, we don't have a problem. They have much weaker cards to put in 1 than they did in 7. Because when we were playing in 8, they'd go in 7, and we have this down problem. But we're better going up, so directing the game a little up. Now, if they go 1, we have just a little more capturing power, and our cards are a bit better directed. And, importantly, for once we threaten doing something in 5. Now, can we necessarily go there? Not always. They might have combo potential. But I think this is the safest tie. I think in this situation, and it shows what matters so much in the L, is having that threaten 5 is so important. And we never got that here with moves in 8, but we do get it with a move in 2. And of course, you can't always go in 2. We don't want to be blocking in their cards when we don't have to. We do want to block in our cards. But here, I think it really shows that what matters in an L is the threaten 5 a lot more than kind of anything else we're looking for. And with this adjacent corner play we played at the start, we didn't have good L plans. And that's why we faced so much trouble. So this is the easiest path to tie, I think, against 8-3, 8-9. I can't claim I would have found it every game, but having looked at the position a bunch, this is the move I would make. I think it is the best path. And I think it shows what we want to do in an L. So 5, 6, 7A is the last card they can reasonably put in 6. It captures our card. It looks a little worse because we can immediately combo stuff back, but it means a move like 3, 6, 8A and 2 no longer makes sense here, right? Because they have flipped the card in 9, and so we don't want to start blocking in their cards when they can block stuff in 2, right? They could never take the card in 9 from 8, but here they've already flipped it, and so we start to have to worry about it. So we really need to go in 8 here, and we still need to control 5, though, because even when we double flip in 8, again, if we don't have 5, they're going to go 7, and we're still going to need a card in 5 that captures the card in 8. Won't need to capture the card in 6. We already flipped that when we comboed stuff. So again, we've got this main line, right? We know the key move for us is going to be in 8, and they are going to reply in 7 because we don't have something for 5. And we can jump ahead to that position, and if you can find a tie, I can't. They have a card for 5, we don't. The card numbers don't seem to fit together very well. We're not very good going down and going to the right. And I think 9, 5, 3A and 9 was a losing move by force on our first turn. And specifically to Rufus in 6, which is not an easy move to find. The other moves, especially 8, 3, 8, 9, and 6, looked more appealing to me. But even against the weaker moves in 6, it was pretty hard to find a tie. We had to be pretty precise. And so I think it's just so interesting that a move that's an adjacent corner that fills out so many of the things that seem like what an adjacent corner should do not work here. And so, again, I really want to stress, if we don't have access to their starter on either side, then an adjacent corner comes with a lot of risk because we have a lot fewer Ls, right? We can't reach the L by taking their starter from the side away from where we play our adjacent corner. So we're going to have to be setting up our Ls most of the time next to our adjacent corner, and that's going to give us limited Ls and limited ways to set up 5 and to control 5. Also, especially if we threaten a combo on their starter from the other side, meaning in this case 2, if we threatened a combo, that would hugely limit the type of cards they could block 6 with, because as we saw in the last video I did, it's so easy to combo just everything there from us while locking stuff in. So I guess I want to say that the L really matters, and if we can take their starter from one side, setting up to take from the other as well can be really powerful. But if we can't take from either side, it comes with a lot of risk, especially if we don't have very good L plans. And in this case, playing 9, 5, 3A and 9 was not a good move. So I guess I may have gone over this, but why was 9 a poor move here? It set up a combo we had in 6, they didn't, and we could plus wall and secure from 8. Seems like it should be great. But we should always be at least a little weary of an adjacent corner when we can't control the other side of their starter. This is part of the reason why them blocking the in-between is so critical, is because we had set up 6 to be a really good square for us, but 2 and 8 weren't necessarily as good, and they block the square that we're going to best play in. More importantly, we had no L plans at all against any of their plausible moves in 6. We could not set up an L that gave us a double capture. The best L we came up with was in fact to play in 2, blocking in one of their cards, but at least it gave us something in 5. Thus, they were never forced to play in 5, and they could slide safely into 7, or in one case into 1, putting us under enormous pressure in basically every variation. And without a planned L, it's difficult for adjacent corners to work well, and it is harder to plan an L from the adjacent corner play than it is from capturing a corner, because you have less control of the resulting moves, and because you're trying to do a bunch of things with your adjacent corner, such as set up a play in the in-between square, have plus wall captures, that it can be hard to also, aside from seeing all that, also see a potential L's. And calculation of main lines. Each variation, we only considered this very narrow path, right? We considered they block the in-between square, we basically always recapture our adjacent corner, and then they either block 5 if they have to, or they go in the corner next to us if they don't. And so the critical line in each line, because we didn't have 5, was they go 6, we go 8, they go 7. And from just playing that move in 9, those are the lines we should be calculating when thinking about it. We should be checking, they go 6, I go 8, they go 7, am I okay or am I not okay? And this, of course, misses things. There are lots of lines, but it is how we want to calculate. We want to identify the main line, the most critical line, the line most likely to be dangerous, get better and better at identifying which line is going to be dangerous, calculate that as well as we can, and only explore the secondary lines after we've checked the key, the main lines, the most important ones to check. And so we want this kind of good and efficient use of limited time per move. And the above sequence is the key sequence for this kind of setup. If we go in the adjacent corner, they go in the in-between square, we set up the L, and they either have to block 5 or they don't have to block 5. And if they don't have to block 5, the most likely place for them to go is the nearby corner, though occasionally there are other spots. Again, better players will think, oh, here's a time when this matters, or here's a time when this matters, and they'll have good thought processes for when those should matter and have good sense of when to check it. But I think this is a good coverage of what the main line in these positions is. So, okay, let's look at another adjacent corner reply. And this one's actually just a much better one. First of all, we have more up than right. So playing in 1 just fundamentally makes a little more sense for our hand than playing in 9, right? It directs better towards what matters. We have that A pointing up, and as we saw last time, that A overpowers anything they have. That's going to give us a lot more options. So it is easier to have double captures because we know, aside from their starter, that card will at least be able to capture anything else. We can secure in 4. We have a same wall in 4 with 368A, Chocobo Chick. We threaten a plus in 2, also with Chocobo Chick. It's great when one card performs double duty, but much like the other one, we have a way to secure our card, and we have a plus in the in-between square. And I also think it's important that adjacent corners don't have to be strong corners. We don't have to try to build up a defense. And I think we can do better in this case, just playing something that still sets up the threats, even if it's not a hard card for our opponent to take. So can you tell me the main line? And you can pause if you'd like and think, we've covered what the main line in these positions is, because I think we should be able to look at this and say, what's the key position 3 moves later? All right. So the sequence I was thinking was they go 8, 3, 8, 9, and 2. This is a card they want to get out of their hand and also has high down-facing value that makes it hard for us to have good moves in 5. We, of course, go in 4, setting up the combo, securing our card, setting up an L, and giving us our best chance to have double captures in 5. And they decide, do I have to block 5? No, I don't, because 9A37 plays so well against Amaranth, A747, it can plus wallet either same wallet from its right or plus wallet from below, so we don't have to block 5. So instead, we can play in 7. And it's a little tricky to find a tie here. So you can pause if you want to find it, but because we don't have the card we'd really love to play in 5, it becomes a bit difficult. All right. So the answer was 6, 9, 7, 7, and 5. Here our L was almost good. It secured a card, and we had the double capture in 5. But because their 9A37 played amazingly against our key capturer, we were still in tons of danger. But that's somewhat unlucky for a card of theirs to play that well against us. And I think it should give us a sense of, that this move was fundamentally decent if we could still get a tie when they had a card that played so well against our remaining card. And also, we couldn't take their starter. Our hand wasn't built for it. We shouldn't expect to be pressing. So against a corner starter that we can't take from either direction, adjacent corners have a lot of risk to them, I think. And the primary thing to care about is our L setup. If we'd had better L setups, we could have tied a lot more easily or even pressed. And also, if you start playing setups, we talked about this with capturing, that you kind of need this sequence of I capture, they recapture, and then I go in one of the corners. And I do that with control of 5 being paramount. And that kind of understanding gets you to be like, okay, here's the thing to check, and I don't need to check all these extraneous moves. And here, we similarly want use of 5. And because we've often secured a card first this time, instead of we capture their starter, they recapture, they have the secured card. Here, we played this corner, they played in between, we secured our corner, we already have a secure card, and that means we don't care as much if they have a play in 5, but we really want to threaten a play in 5 ourselves. And then we covered, here's the critical line, which is they block the in-between, we set up an L, and either they have to block in 5, in which case we're usually in good shape, or they don't have to block in 5, in which case we're often in trouble, and their key move is usually the near corner. Sometimes other moves will be better along the way than what we've covered, but this should be the first line you check. I think it's really important to know what the main line of this kind of play is, and to check that first, and only then move on to other lines. All right. Hope this was interesting. I think it's a pretty complicated topic.